History is filled with monarchs whose names echo through time, sometimes as symbols of greatness, sometimes as tyrants, and sometimes as cautionary tales of failure. Few kings, however, have acquired the kind of infamy attached to Ferdinand VII of Spain. Born into a declining empire, hailed at first as El Deseado, or the Desired One, and later condemned as El Rey Felon, the treacherous king, Ferdinand VII's legacy is one of betrayal, repression, and bizarre scandal. His political failures alone would have guaranteed him a dark place in history. But what makes his story truly unforgettable are the whispers that surrounded his private life. Whispers that painted him not only as a despot, but also as perhaps the most perverted king in all of European history. To understand why this reputation took root, we must dig into his childhood, his rise, his reign, his personal relationships, and the scandalous rumors that outlived him. Ferdinand was born on October 14, 1784, the eldest son of King Charles IV of Spain and Queen Maria Luisa of Parma. His birth was celebrated as a moment of hope, but even in infancy, Ferdinand was thrust into a court riddled with gossip, corruption, and intrigue. Charles IV was widely seen as weak and indecisive, more interested in hunting than ruling. Maria Luisa, meanwhile, faced constant whispers about her closeness to Manuel Godoy, the prime minister. Rumors suggested that Godoy, not Charles, might have fathered some of her children. Whether true or not, these rumors made Ferdinand's childhood unstable and humiliating. He grew up in an atmosphere of distrust, suspicion, and resentment, traits that would define him for the rest of his life. As a boy, Ferdinand was described as cold, moody, and arrogant. Tutors noted his intelligence, but also his vindictive streak. He was not a child who sought warmth or friendship. Instead, he seemed to cultivate grudges. His parents' obvious favoritism toward Godoy deepened his bitterness. Ferdinand came to see himself as the rightful savior of Spain, a prince destined to sweep aside corruption and restore dignity. Yet his idea of dignity was not based on reform or progress, but on restoring an outdated, absolutist vision of monarchy. By the early 1800s, Spain was in turmoil. Once the mightiest empire in the world, it had fallen into decline. Napoleon's wars shook Europe, and Spain found itself dragged into conflicts it could not win. Charles IV, relying heavily on Godoy, made unpopular alliances with France that brought ruin to Spanish armies. The people despised Godoy and saw Charles as his puppet. Ferdinand seized this opportunity. He secretly plotted against his father and Godoy, portraying himself as the antidote to their corruption. In 1807, he was caught in the so-called El Escorial conspiracy, a plan to overthrow Godoy's influence. Although briefly arrested, Ferdinand became more popular than ever, hailed by the Spanish people as the embodiment of their hopes. They began calling him the Desired One. In 1808, a popular uprising forced Charles IV to abdicate, and Ferdinand was crowned king. Yet almost immediately, Napoleon Bonaparte intervened. Napoleon lured Ferdinand to Bayonne under the guise of negotiation, then forced him to abdicate the throne. Napoleon installed his brother Joseph as King of Spain, while Ferdinand was taken as a prisoner to France. The Spanish people resisted fiercely, launching the bloody Peninsular War, one of the first true national wars of resistance in modern Europe. For years, Spain bled in the struggle. By the time Napoleon fell in 1814, Ferdinand was released. He returned to Spain in triumph, greeted once again as El Deseado, the savior who would restore the nation after years of devastation. But the people's hopes would soon be crushed. During his exile, liberal leaders had written the Constitution of Cadiz in 1812, a groundbreaking document promising freedom of the press, separation of powers, and a modern parliamentary system. Spain was poised to take a leap into the modern era, but Ferdinand despised liberalism. Within weeks of his return, he abolished the Constitution, re-established absolute monarchy, and imprisoned or exiled liberal leaders. The Spain that had bled for freedom now found itself shackled once more. His reign ushered in repression, censorship, and terror. This era became known as the ominous decade, a time when secret police spied on citizens, dissenters were tortured, and executions became routine. Ferdinand turned Spain backward while much of Europe cautiously moved forward. His fourth and final wife, Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies, was much younger and politically savvy. She gave Ferdinand his long-desired heir, though not a son but a daughter, Isabella. This birth set off a succession crisis, as Spain's traditional Salic law barred women from inheriting. Ferdinand issued the Pragmatic Sanction to allow his daughter to rule, sparking the Carlist Wars after his death. Yet even this marriage was colored by rumors of Ferdinand's unhealthy obsessions, particularly his desperation for heirs and his strange treatment of his wives. So what exactly were these perversions that gave him such a notorious reputation? The truth remains murky. Reliable records are scarce, and much of what we know comes from gossip, memoirs, and later accounts that may have exaggerated the truth. Still, the consistency of the rumors suggests that Ferdinand's behavior was at least unusual, if not outright disturbing. Some sources claimed he took pleasure in humiliating his wives, reducing them to tears and fear. Others said he indulged in bizarre fetishes, fixations that went beyond ordinary sexual life into realms that shocked even those accustomed to royal excess. The story of the pornographic illustrations is particularly persistent, suggesting that Ferdinand not only consumed obscene material, but actively created it as a means of tormenting his partners. Beyond his private life, Ferdinand's physical decline reinforced his grotesque image. By the late 1820s, he was obese, sickly, and plagued by gout. Some accounts suggest he contracted venereal diseases, possibly as a result of his habits. Paintings from this period show a bloated, pale man, a far cry from the heroic figure once hailed as Spain's savior. His desperation for an heir consumed him, pushing Maria Cristina into multiple pregnancies despite his failing health. His last years were marked by paranoia, cruelty, and physical decay. When Ferdinand died in 1833 at the age of 48, the nation did not mourn him as a beloved monarch. Instead, his death sparked a vicious succession conflict. Supporters of his daughter Isabella clashed with those of his brother Don Carlos, plunging Spain into the Carlist Wars. These wars would devastate Spain for decades, a direct consequence of Ferdinand's decisions. His reign left the country politically broken, socially divided, and economically weak. Yet it is his reputation as a perverted king that lingers most vividly in popular memory. Writers and historians, fascinated by his strange character, repeated the stories of his perverse obsessions. Even modern scholars have tried to analyze him psychologically. Psychiatrist Luis Mingus Martin argued that Ferdinand displayed traits of psychopathy, charm on the surface, but a lack of empathy, vindictiveness, and sadistic tendencies. His upbringing in a corrupt court, his humiliation at the hands of Napoleon, and his relentless drive for control all contributed to a twisted personality that seemed to take pleasure in domination, whether political or personal. But how much of the legend is fact? It is possible that Ferdinand was not uniquely perverted, but simply unlucky in his marriages, cruel in his politics, and hated enough that enemies spread every possible scandal. Royal courts were notorious for exaggeration, and gossip often served political purposes. A king who destroyed a beloved constitution, censored the press, and executed liberals would naturally accumulate enemies eager to blacken his name. In such an environment, even small eccentricities could be blown into monstrous tales. Still, the persistence of these stories cannot be ignored. Centuries later, we are still fascinated by Ferdinand VII, not for his policies alone, but for the sense of mystery surrounding his personal life. He remains a symbol of how absolute power, personal cruelty, and political betrayal can combine to create a legend darker than mere tyranny. Whether the most perverted king in history or simply one of the most hated, Ferdinand VII's legacy is inseparable from scandal. His reign was a disaster for Spain, and his private life became the stuff of grim legend. In the end, the question remains, was Ferdinand VII truly the monster described by gossip, or a flawed, insecure man whose failures were magnified by rumor? The truth is likely somewhere in between. Yet for a king once called the Desired One, the tragic irony is that he became remembered as the opposite, a treacherous, scandal-ridden ruler whose memory inspires not admiration but horror. Nearly 2 centuries later, his story endures as a chilling reminder of how a crown can conceal corruption, cruelty, and a darkness that outlives the man himself. Yet politics was only half the story. Behind palace walls, rumors of Ferdinand's private life began to circulate, and these whispers would ensure his place in history as not only a failed king, but also a scandalous figure of perversity. His marriages became the focus of court gossip. Ferdinand married 4 times, and none of these unions brought stability. His first wife, Maria Antonia of Naples, was said to loathe him. Some described him as cruel, impotent, and abusive. Their marriage was fraught with tension, and when Maria Antonia died young, rumors swirled that she had been poisoned, possibly with Ferdinand's knowledge. His second wife, Isabel of Braganza, seemed more compatible. She was cultured and intelligent, and she tried to bring some dignity to the Spanish court. But her reign as queen was short. She died in childbirth, leaving behind whispers that Ferdinand's harsh treatment and disregard for her health had contributed to her early death. Ferdinand's third marriage to Maria Josefa Amalia of Saxony produced the most shocking rumors. She was extremely devout, innocent, and sheltered. When she married Ferdinand, she was horrified by what he expected from her in the bedroom. According to scandalous accounts, Ferdinand demanded degrading sexual practices. Some chroniclers claimed that he commissioned explicit, grotesque illustrations to educate her about marital duties, images that were more pornographic than instructive. Terrified and repulsed, Maria Josefa allegedly begged confessors and priests for guidance, asking if she was obligated to endure what she called her husband's unnatural behavior. She died young as well, adding another layer of tragedy to the king's marital history. And that's the dark, controversial story of Ferdinand VII, the king who went from the desired one to the treacherous king. Was he truly the most perverted monarch in history, or just a victim of rumors? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of history's most infamous figures. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.